Hi, good morning, everybody. Can I first of all thank you all for joining us today for this investor presentation. My name is Peter Rendleton. I'm the founder of Wharf, and I'm only going to speak for about 1 minute just to provide a little bit of context around this week's visit. That reminds me, if anyone has their mobiles on, would you please turn them off, or at least vibrate with no sound? I'd be grateful. The reason why we're here today is that for about 5 years I spent a lot of time based in Silicon Valley, based in Sunnyvale. And over that time I met a number of early stage New Zealand tech companies coming into the valley. They were very big in Auckland, massive in Wellington, household names in Gore. But when they got to San Francisco, they realised that absolutely nobody knew them, and much more importantly, they knew very few people. And so what very often happened after 2 or 3 weeks was those entrepreneurs would jump back onto a plane back to Auckland or Christchurch, and that was the last we saw of them. So the decision or the idea to set up Wharf was to really set up a system that would facilitate introductions into the ecosystem. But when I talk about the ecosystem over there, I'm talking about mentors, I'm talking about potential investors, I'm talking about potential business partners. So in January this year, Wharf 42 announced the launch of the Lead Joy program. What that means is early July, we're taking over a small number of emerging ICT businesses. They will be spending 10 weeks on bootcamp in Sunnyvale, and then we will be working with them thereafter to make sure that bootcamp has generated sufficient reason for them to stay and grow their business in that region. And it's in that context that Bill and Adiba are here today. I caught up with Adiba. I will introduce them both a little bit and then they'll introduce themselves. I met Adiba in November in what we've now referred to 3 times, I think this week, as the Coolest Cafe in Palo Alto. About 2 weeks after we had our coffee, it changed its name, changed its ownership. And then we met up again in San Jose in February, and I said to Adiba, look, I keep talking this story about the Silicon Valley ecosystem. Being a bit tired, particularly coming from a Kiwi when I'm doing it here and there. I thought it would be great if you could go over to New Zealand and spend a few days talking to both investors and entrepreneurs about just how the ecosystem there works and the importance of connecting to it. And Adiba, a week later, said, that sounds great, let's try first week of May, and do you mind if I bring along a friend, one of my colleagues, and suggested Bill. And I'd known Bill, I actually pitched to Bill 5 years ago, so it goes back some way. I was absolutely delighted that we have here in New Zealand for a week both the CEO of Silicon Valley Forum, the largest entrepreneur network in the Valley, who can talk really much from the entrepreneur perspective of the Valley, and Bill, who is Managing Director of Garage Technology Ventures, who can talk very much on the investor side. So that's the context for this week. It's really for both Bill and Adiba to get feedback, to get a better understanding as to how the New Zealand innovation system is working, and then provide their input and suggestions as to how we can build more bridges between this country and the Valley. So that's the context. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Adiba, who will talk a little bit about herself and Silicon Valley Forum, and then we'll both exit the stage and hand over to Bill, who will talk a little bit more about the art of angel investing.
Thank you so much, Peter. Hands, come on. Good morning to the coolest bank I've ever seen. This is so awesome. You guys are so trendy with all these super cool office spaces and all that. I have to see, this is definitely one of the coolest banks I've ever come into. So, yay you. Yeah, so my name is Adiba, and I'm CEO of something called Silicon Valley Forum. I'm sure that most of you have never heard about it, and it's basically we've been around for 32 years in Silicon Valley, so we're older than most of the companies that are in the area, most of the things that's going on there. So basically part of the DNA of the Silicon Valley ecosystem. And that helps us to be connected to, everything that's going on, whether it's the large corporations and what they're up to, the really big ones, and what's going on in the tech industry, what kind of trends are we seeing in the technology industry in all different verticals and sectors. And we cover that and make sure that we produce different kind of content on that and make sure to deliver that to a larger audience. Everything from the corporations to developers to startup entrepreneurs to VCs, angel investors, to everyone that has any kind of interest in what's going on in the Silicon Valley tech ecosystem, as well as, of course, everything surrounding startups. So from the idea to the exit, so everything that's happening in between on their journey, we try to cover all of that to make sure that the startup entrepreneurs can connect to that ecosystem and to those players, and hang out with Bill and pitch to Bill and make sure to get Bill's money. That's what we kind of help them to do. So we put on a lot of competitions as well, and we do a lot of different kind of global activities. Right now, we're actually, I think, just in 1.5 years, we've probably done things for about 40 countries. So we do a lot of different activities for countries on a daily basis. We actually have a World Cup Tech Challenge coming up on June 4th. So if you are in Silicon Valley, you can't miss that one. It's a World Cup in technology for startups from, we just closed the applications. We had 51 countries that applied to compete. So it's going to be tough. There are 2 New Zealand companies that are competing for that as well. So keep your fingers crossed. Who knows? New Zealand might win the World Cup for the first time. Have you guys won the World Cup ever? What about you? Hey, as long as it's a World Cup, you want to be world class, world best and stuff. We're really happy to do this together with Peter and with the whole ecosystem here in New Zealand. We've been here this is like the last city on our journey, on our trip here. It's been absolutely amazing and fascinating to see how much great companies there are here, but also to see how the whole ecosystem are working together and collaborating to make things happen. Meeting both with the government kind of part of it, as well as the local city councils and city municipality kind of governments, as well as, of course, the champions that are out there to help these startups. And I believe that, of course, all the investors, you are surely a part of that journey and champions in that. But also, of course, service providers like banks and law firms and others that can be there and support. And in Silicon Valley, the bank is not a typical bank. The bank is actually also very entrepreneurial in its way of being, and so is a lawyer, and so is, anyone that's working with the startups have to kind of be part of that ecosystem and have that kind of mindset. And as I hear, ABS is also doing that, right? We're working with that. So I believe James told us some of those initiatives that you guys are working with. I think that is kind of all from me. We have a rock star here with us, Bill Reichert. He's the guy you go to when it comes to understanding how the whole venture investment community works in Silicon Valley, as well as globally. But also have been an entrepreneur for many times himself, knowing the other side of the table, or we're all on the same side. Right, yeah, always. How that works and how to kind of support these companies and make sure to get the best ones that will scale like rockets. All right, give it up for Bill Reichert.
Thank you so much, Adiba. Let's give it up for Adiba and Peter again, all right? Thank you. And so first I just have to say, it is just a delight and an honor to be back in New Zealand and to be back to Auckland and have the opportunity to be with you guys today. And thank you, ASD, the coolest bank in the Southern Hemisphere, the coolest bank, I don't know, whatever. But thank you for hosting in this extraordinary building. And thank you all for coming. Before we start, I just want to get an understanding of who is here. The idea is that most of you are angels, and we're going to talk about the investment environment and investment practices. How many people here are angel investors? Yes. Okay, good. And then, are there some VC firms, sneaking in? Okay, good. Excellent. And any entrepreneurs who have also sort of, okay, good for you, great. All right, and then how many bankers? Let's see. Okay, not, banker is an old term. It doesn't mean what it used to be. So banker now and him means, entrepreneurial spirit to help innovation and the innovation ecosystem. So thank you, ASP. So we thought that maybe to start this morning it would be fun to talk a little bit about some practices in angel investing that we've observed in Silicon Valley and that I have come to some conclusions about working with angels for many, many years now, and listening to other people coach angels. What I have discovered is that a lot of people who are coaching angels may not be giving what I consider to be the best advice. And so what I'm going to share with you today are the top 10 myths of angel investing. And where this came from was long ago and far away when we started Garage. We got together in 1998 and launched Garage. And we were a bunch of entrepreneurs who didn't know anything about angel investing or venture investing, other than the fact that I had spent years and years in 4 different startups, crawling up and down Sand Hill Road begging for venture capital, right? So we started Garage with this idea that we wanted to create a different kind of venture firm. And by different kind of venture firm, we meant a few different things. One of which was we wanted to create a venture firm that was designed for the benefit of entrepreneurs. That was a radical idea because traditionally as an entrepreneur, I didn't feel as though venture capitalists were designed for my benefit. So we thought what we would do instead was to share our own experiences, our own scars, our own mistakes, as well as things that had worked out. So that was a big part of what we were doing in creating Garage. And so that meant that we were going to be very outbound. We cast the net broadly. Our thesis was we are going to read every single executive summary that comes in. Most VCs, they might say that they read, but basically they only read the ones that are referred by their friends. So we said, look, we're going to open up the venture capital ecosystem and let every entrepreneur from all over the planet have access to the venture capital ecosystem. So what that meant was we decided we were going to reach out globally because back then, the obvious next big thing was that innovation had gone global. And that the only innovators were not in Silicon Valley, they were all over the planet. So we knew we had to reach out globally to get the best entrepreneurs with the best emerging technologies. The other thing that was going on at that time was there was this thing called angels that had just started fluttering around Silicon Valley. So there was an organization called Band of Angels that had just been started in 1995, one of the first organized angel investment communities in high technology. And so there were all these angels that were coming into the ecosystem. And what we discovered was that a lot of the angels didn't know what they were doing. So we didn't know what we were doing, and they didn't know what they were doing. So we figured we'd get together and try to work together to do it better. Because what we did discover was the VCs frequently were coming into conflict with angels. Because the angels were kind of messing up the deals, and the entrepreneurs didn't know any better. So when we started Garage, we started a program for entrepreneurs called The Art of the Start, which was a conference and a series of materials that we developed for entrepreneurs to help them be more successful right from the start. And what we discovered is we also needed to put together a program called The Art of Angel Investing. So we would actually hold workshops for angels to help develop and educate angels. So the world has changed a lot since then. Angel investing has changed a lot. The whole ecosystem has gotten a lot more mature and more experienced. But there are still some misconceptions, at least from what I can see, in some of the advice that's offered to angels. So I want to share those with you this morning. So let's start with myth number 1. Myth number 1 is most coaches of angels, most angel groups tell the angel investors, you should invest in what you know, right? Now that seems to make sense. If you come out of a software background, you're going to know more about software. If you come out of a hardware background, you're going to know more about hardware. But what I would suggest to you is it might be misleading to think that what you knew when you were in the thick of it is still highly relevant today when you're investing in your company. So when we started Garage, what we realized is, in spite of our backgrounds, I spent 4 different companies in the software business. I started my first software company when I was a grad student at Stanford, long ago and far away, before it was fashionable for grad students to start software companies. But I realized there was no chance that I was going to be the smartest guy about software, much less about new software technologies that we're developing. So we realized there's no way that any of us could be the smartest guys about any sector at all. And so what we decided instead was to be technology agnostic, and then go through a process based on a confidence that we did not know in pursuing and diligencing all the companies that we went through. So I would suggest to you it's dangerous to think that there is something that you know when you're investing in current technologies. And the converse of that is, the reality is, most winners are black swans. Most winners are something that you just didn't anticipate, that you didn't think that is in the domain, that you don't really know that well. So if you narrow your field to what you think you know, you are most likely to miss the big winners. So I would suggest to you, yes, it's valuable to pay attention, to your knowledge of a market and a sector, and to bring in other smart people, but don't think that you should only be investing in, quote unquote, what you know. Myth number 2. Myth number 2 is, the traditional advice given to investors is, you got to focus on making money, and that's why you're investing. And that seems sort of obvious at some level. But what I would suggest to you is that puts the focus on the wrong thing when you're looking at a startup company. When you're looking at a startup company, if you're focused on making money, you're going to go through a process of trying to evaluate their financial projections. You're going to look at it the way you look at a Wall Street stock. And that's not the right way to look at a startup company. When you're looking at a startup company, you've got to focus on whether or not that company is creating value for its target market. Because you know the numbers are wrong. You know whatever the entrepreneur says of their financial forecasts, or even their pricing model, or anything like that. You know their margins are wrong on their forecasts. You know all that stuff is wrong. So all you can depend upon is, are they creating value in some fundamental level that's going to enable them to create a valuable company? So rule number 2 is focus on entrepreneurs that are clearly creating value, and then hopefully they'll build a sustainable company that eventually generates a lot of wealth. Rule number 3, or myth number 3. Myth number 3 is the key to good angel investing is good due diligence. And so every angel group puts together this laundry list, 85 points that they're going to drill the entrepreneur on. And they're going to collect every piece of data and every scrap of paper and inspect every body cavity of all of those entrepreneurs, right? So we figure, we go through a tough enough due diligence process and cover all our bases, then we'll make good investment decisions. And I'm telling you again, startups are not like publicly traded equities. You just cannot collect the data that really makes the difference. The reality is, you really got to develop good intuition. And, it's hard to diligence the intuitive side of a decision. But what we all know is that human beings don't just make decisions with their heads, they make decisions with their hearts and with their guts. And you've got to develop that capacity to have good instincts about the team, about whether or not something is going right or whether or not it's going wrong. But it may not be something that fits on a piece of paper or in a form in a due diligence checklist. So pay attention to your intuition, which relates to rule number 4. Every investor is taught when they sort of grow up in the investment world, don't let your emotions cloud your decisions, right? So, whenever anybody's trying to put together a portfolio of stocks, All of the investment advisors, they tell you, the problem that investors have is they invest emotionally. They get attached to stocks, and if things go up, they get scared and they sell too early. If things go down, they get wishful and they say, oh no, hopefully it'll come back, right? And so every investment advisor warns investors not, to be sure that they don't let their emotions cloud their decisions. That's sort of one of the top rules of public equity trading is you can't let your emotions govern. But I'm telling you again, investing in startups is totally different than that. Investing in startups, you just don't have the data. And so, you have to pay attention to your emotions. If for whatever reason you don't like the founders, it doesn't matter how brilliant their technology is, right? It doesn't matter how cool their business model is. If you don't like the founders, that is data. There's some data there. Why don't you like the founders? Is it that you don't trust them, or they don't respect you, or they seem arrogant, or what is it that you don't like about the founders? Now, it may very well be that you should process that and get over it, but at a minimum, it's data that you should figure out what's wrong here. I mean, I'm in love with this technology. I think it's going to make a ton of money. I just don't trust this guy. So what I'm saying is, if there's something wrong there, it's a prescription for disaster. At some point, something's going to go wrong. And I'm sure, I don't know how many experiences each of you have. I'm sure you had this experience where you invest in a company, you go along with the group, you think it's a cool technology, you believe what the entrepreneur says, and then something goes wrong. And you say to yourself, I knew in my gut there was something wrong. So all I'm saying is, it makes sense up front to listen to your emotions, to listen to how you feel about investment, and then process it. Figure out, why do you have this gut reaction against this particular person or this particular deal? Process that as data in your investment decisions. Use your emotional intelligence to inform your investment decisions. Myth number 5. The best way to make sure you're investing in the best deals is to get everybody to agree this is something we should invest in, right? Because the wisdom of the crowd will help us avoid making mistakes. So a lot of venture firms operate that way. They operate, there's got to be a consensus among the partners. A lot of angel groups operate to some extent that way, looking for broad consensus. But the data says, it turns out the best investments are controversial. Generally, if everybody agrees this is a good investment, it turns out that those investments are pretty mediocre. Because if everybody agrees it's a good investment, that must mean it's sort of obvious. And if it's sort of obvious, then it cannot be very powerfully unique. It means somebody else is thinking about it. Somebody else is probably doing it. It's unlikely that this company is going to be the company that dominates the industry. Instead, what seems to happen is the investments that seem a little bit oddball, that seem like, God, I don't know if that can work, turn out frequently to be the biggest winners. So when you look at not all of, but a lot of the big winners out there, like an Airbnb or an Uber, or even, I won't take Groupon, but these companies, Airbnb and Uber are both good examples of companies that seem like they were not at all obvious, right? Airbnb, really? You're going to sleep on somebody else's couch? You're going to you're going to show up at somebody's place you've never met before, you're going to pay to sleep on their couch. I'm not sure that's a brilliant idea. Maybe I can imagine a couple of millennials who are desperate, doing that, but, is that a business, right? Or you take Uber, for example. Uber, he's got a business model that is illegal in almost every city in the world, right? How about that for a brilliant idea, right? But it's these things that people say, hey, that's crazy, that's not going to work, that turn out to be huge, because once they pierce, that level of achievement, there's no one else around. I mean, it's just really hard to catch up with these oddball investments that manage to punch through the ceiling of revenue growth. And so I'm not saying the opposite is true. It doesn't mean that just because an investment is controversial that it's going to be successful. That's the unfortunate part of this model. I wish it were true. But if everybody thinks it's a brilliant idea, I'm not saying don't invest in it, but what I am saying is probably that's going to be a mediocre investment, and you want to look for these somewhat edgy, somewhat controversial, not necessarily obvious, but potential like black swan types of investments. Then number 5 is success in angel investing. Success in venture investing comes from adding value, right? And so everybody out there in the investment world goes out and says, the reason you should take my money, the reason you should take my meeting, the reason you should work with me is because I add value, right? How often do you hear VCs on stage saying to entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial audience, the VC, wags his finger. It's almost always a he. The VC wags his finger at the entrepreneurs and says, be careful whose money you take, because you want value-added money. We have value-added money, right? But the reality is, you don't want to invest in a company that needs your value add. Right? It turns out, the harder you have to work on an investment, the less likely it is to succeed. So, you get into this model that says we're value-added investors, and it tricks you into thinking that if this investment comes along, and you got these guys with a cool technology who don't understand the market, but you think you understand the market, perfect match, right? Because they got the technology, we understand the market. But that means you as an investor are responsible for the market success of that technology. Do you really want to take that on? No, you don't. You want to invest in the team that has a cool technology and they understand the market. And so, what every VC realizes, but they don't say out loud, is you really want to invest in a company where you don't have to lift a finger, right? That's the company you want to invest in. You don't want to fall into the trap of thinking, hey, I can help build this company. I love it. Oh, God, these VCs, they get on stage. And, this happened just last week. This guy gets on stage, brand name venture capital firm. Says, I'm from these, we're company builders. That's what we do. We build companies. And I'm going, I'm biased a little because I was an entrepreneur. The reality is VCs do not build companies. Entrepreneurs build companies. And that's their job, right? It's their job to build companies. And that's great. Let them do it. You don't, as an investor, you don't want to be the one responsible for building the company. And if you get into that, almost certainly things are going to blow up. I'm sure you've all had the experience of wanting to guide the entrepreneur. And the entrepreneur doesn't want your guidance. That becomes a problem. You gotta make sure you're aligned when you get together with these entrepreneurs. You can't take the responsibility for building their company. Which relates to rule number 7. Make sure you protect yourself. So a lot of angels get this warning from their colleagues, which is, you're angel investors. You're at the bottom of the stack. You're the first guys in. And so, those VCs are going to come in, and they're not going to care about you. They're just going to crush you. So make sure you design into the documents all these protections so that those VCs can't crush you. And we have this exact issue. We're Garage. Garage is a seed venture capital firm. Back when we started, to call ourselves a seed firm was pretty radical because, real VCs don't do seed, right? And so we said, hey, there's this big opportunity to do seed. The problem is when you're a seed investor, it's tough as the company goes through multiple rounds of investment. Now, in our model, we make sure we reserve lots of dry powder for follow-on rounds. Angel groups don't always have that model. I think they should pursue that more. But instead, a lot of angels wrap up companies in all these protections. And what I'm telling you is, you gotta keep it simple. If you think you can protect yourself by sticking in all these protective provisions in the process, you're just going to poison the company. And if you think that you need to protect yourself because you don't trust the entrepreneur, you don't trust the other investors, then don't invest in the company. And the only way to make a win out of it is if the company soars and you get continuous step-ups. You're not going to get a win by wrapping up the company in a whole bunch of protective provisions. So then rule number 8, or myth number 8, is there you are, you're looking at a company, you want to invest in them, you're putting out a term sheet, and you think, the most important thing for me to negotiate here is this valuation thing. Because, I know over time, depending upon how follow-on rounds go, my ownership is a function of my valuation math, right? And so what happens is you wind up focusing so intensely on this valuation, you lose sight of the other most important things in negotiating a deal. So you know how the process goes. You meet an entrepreneur, and you hear the pitch, and you fall in love with the entrepreneur, you fall in love with the technology, you fall in love with the vision, and you do some due diligence, and you get to this term sheet stage, and up until then, it's all hugs and kisses and love, right? And then the term sheet's on the table. So the term sheet's on the table, and all of a sudden, the entrepreneur lawyers up, right? And then you're lawyering up, and then all of a sudden, people are negotiating, and now you're on the other side of the table. And you're trying to be friends, but you're negotiating. And everybody then goes through this multi-week process of focusing on these technical legal terms around, and valuation is the one that is most near and dear to everyone's heart, because that's a hard money number. The result is you pull apart from the entrepreneur, and you're not looking at the important things that are going to determine the success of the company. And what I'm saying is, shared expectations about the future of the company are much more important than the valuation. And when you get trapped in the negotiation around valuation, you stop the conversation about where you want to take this company. And what am I thinking that you should do to take this company forward, and do they overlap? And the result is almost every investor goes through what we refer to as the first board meeting surprise. I don't know how many of you have had this experience, but you've known the team for 6-9 months, and you've been dating and loving and blowing kisses for 6 to 9 months, and finally, you get the term sheet done, you celebrate, plink, we've done the deal, we're partners now, and a couple weeks later, you have the first board meeting. And, you're all sitting there having, great expectations, and the entrepreneur comes in with his, interim CEO, CFO, and they go through the numbers, and there's $100,000 missing that you thought was on the balance sheet. Wait a second. We put this money, where did that $100,000 go? And the entrepreneur says, well, the lawyers were a little more expensive than we thought, and we had some payables we didn't really talk about much that we had to pay back, and Bob, his credit card was maxed out, we had to. So we go, how did this happen? How did this happen? We actually had one situation, one of my favorites was first board meeting, after the close, and we all come in, and the CEO walks in and says, guess what? We decided to change the name of the company. Here's the new name of the company. Boom. Didn't tell anybody. Dave, why didn't you at least mention this to us? So yeah, I didn't want to kind of get all wrapped up in you guys, blah, blah, blah. And whoa, there's a trust issue here that somehow we missed in the process. Unfortunately, Dave did not last that long, But again, the key is when you're an investor and you're talking money and you're worried about the dollars and cents in the documents, frequently you lose track of the shared expectations. Where do you want to take the company? What's going on now? You're reading the business plan or the slide deck. You're looking at the slide deck that was written 8 months ago. And so 8 months later, that slide deck is almost totally irrelevant. And we decided, yeah, we're going to go after the hospital sector, not the utility sector. Whoops, whoa, that wasn't part of the discussion. And so, but you've lost track of the entrepreneur because you get buried in the minutia of the term sheet. Make sure that you are deeply in touch with the entrepreneur on shared expectations. How do they want to take the company forward? What are your expectations for your role? What are the entrepreneur's expectations for her role or his role? Myth number 9. It's cheap to start a company now, right? It's cheap. It's an angel investor's dream because you can now start a company with just a little bit of angel money. Isn't that great? Well, the challenge, unfortunately, is it may be really cheap to start a company, but it's really expensive to build a successful company. And that's something a lot of people don't really talk about. But it's obvious if anybody can start a company in any sector and disrupt any part of the world, then that means a lot of people are going to start a company in every sector and disrupt that part of the world. So you're going to have a lot of competition in almost every sector you pursue. So just because it's easy to start the company doesn't mean it's easy to build the company because it takes a lot of money to grab customers, to get brand recognition, and to go global. So you've got to be really careful about your capital requirements budget for a company going forward. Just because these guys were super efficient, we test all the time. Teams that come into our office and they hacked together an app over the weekend or over a couple of months, and they launched it. And they got 500,000 downloads, and they haven't spent a dime on sales and marketing. Isn't that amazingly cool? Right? And so you're thinking they're never going to have to spend a dime on sales and marketing, right? Wrong. That's never going to happen. To get from the first 500,000 downloads to the next 5 million downloads can cost a lot of money, depending upon the company, the sector, and all those sorts of things. So don't fool yourself into thinking that because we have this flat, open internet world, that it's necessarily cheap to build a company. The other end of the spectrum, we've noticed now, it has never been more expensive to build a successful company. It's unheard of. I've been around for a while. It is unheard of that it would take $1 billion of cash to get to an IPO, or more than that. And now we see all these unicorns that are building these companies, extraordinary valuations. That's great. But it has taken, in some cases, billions of dollars to get these companies to where they are. How do you play in that world if you're a seed-stage investor? It's really, really scary. So you've got to be careful, kind of where you're going to play your money and whether or not you want a unicorn. For us, what we decided as Garage, our approach is we can't play in these highly competitive, particularly consumer-facing spaces where it's relatively easy to enter the market. We just can't play it. We focus on companies that have a deep technology, that have a sustainable competitive advantage, that are unique in their particular slice of the market, where they can make a big dent, but where it's not easy for anyone else to come in and compete with them. So, not everybody is that way. There are different investment strategies. That's just the approach that we're taking. But our idea is we want to invest in something that has a fundamental asset value, has some fundamental intellectual property or technology that we know is of value to someone. And our mission is to help the entrepreneur monetize it within their company Worst case, we hope somebody else will see the value of the technology and decide that they want to monetize it within their company, i.e. acquire the company. So you just got to be careful about this new world that we live in, where it's really cheap to start a company and think, hey, I only have to throw $25,000 into these guys to launch a product. Isn't that wonderful? But then they take a lot more than that downstream. And if you don't have a lot of dry powder to participate in the later rounds, again, you might get crushed. And then number 10. Number 10, again, comes out of this sort of Wall Street investment advisor attitude that says, you know, it's always important to diversify your portfolio. And, you know, so sometimes you have angel investors who think, okay, you know, there are 8 sectors out there of technology, and, you know, I should do something in Internet of Things, and I should do something in gaming, and I should do something in e-commerce, and I should do something in big data, and maybe I should do something in, right? Because they want to diversify. And what I'm saying is, you know, your venture portfolio is such a narrow, specialized part of your whole portfolio. Don't worry about diversifying within venture. You know, diversify your overall portfolio, right? So maybe somewhere else you have some real estate, or somewhere else you've got some gold. I don't know, that's up to you guys. But within venture, you know, you should just be focusing on the best deals, rather than thinking, I got to put a bet in all these different sectors because somehow that diversification will pay off. Probably you'll wind up investing in mediocre companies that happen to have a position in each of these different sectors. You don't want to do that. The other side of this coin is, when we started Garage, you know, everybody was asking us, okay, what's your investment thesis? You know, what sectors are you going to go after? And, you know, back then, you know, internet was big. And so, you know, our thesis was, well, yeah, internet's big, but everybody's chasing all the same things. Everybody's trying to go after, mainly, back then, consumer-facing e-commerce plays or game plays. And our thesis was, boy, if it already has a label, it's probably too late for us to invest. Because we decided, you know, we'll get crushed if we try to follow the crowd. Because the crowd is going to over-invest in the next big thing. And the chance that we invested in the winner is therefore reduced. We were very lucky. We were the first investors in a company called Pandora. And back then, music was a mess. I mean, and so generally music had sort of fallen out of favor. And these guys came in with this idea called the Music Genome Project and said, you know, we're going to change the way music is discovered and listened to. And we fell in love with this team. Now, it turns out Pandora was an 11-year overnight success. But that's okay. You know, God bless persistent entrepreneurs. But it was certainly not the obvious next big thing. And so I would hesitate to suggest that what you should do is chase sectors that are identified as hot sectors, and instead keep your focus on interesting emerging technologies that have a little bit of an edge on that could be those black swans. So those are the top 10 myths of angel investing. Just quickly before we get into the Q&A, I want to share with you my email address. I'm happy and in fact would love to engage with any and all of you in this continued discussion. My email is reichert@garage.com. And if you have follow-up questions, if you want the slides, I'm not sure how if you want the slides, ask me. We may or may not have another way of doing this. But if you disagree, I want to hear that. If you've got a brilliant technology company, I'd love to hear about that as well. So I also want to mention to you, for those of you who want to get a little bit more of a sort of flavor of how some of us in Silicon Valley think, part of what we did when we put together Garage, and part of our mantra of being the first VC firm designed to benefit of entrepreneurs, we have a lot of material on our website for entrepreneurs. We have a section called Resources for Entrepreneurs, where we have a number of guides on, you know, what does it take to raise capital in Silicon Valley? How do you tell your story well? How do you write an executive summary? Do you pitch? That sort of stuff. So we have a lot of guides on our website that if you have entrepreneurs who are looking for additional assistance, feel free to send them that way. So with that, I'd love to start having a discussion here, some back and forth, some questions, and get Adiba and Peter back on stage and continue the dialogue. So, but thank you very much. I appreciate it.